come always to these meetings in New England. I ask friends who are apologizing for not insisting upon this right. Where can the black man look in this country for the insertion of his rights? If he may not look to the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, where under the whole heavens can he look for the sympathy in asserting this right if he may not look at this platform? Have you lifted us up to certain heights to see we as men, and then are any disposed to leave us there without seeing that we are put in positions of all our rights? We look naturally to this platform for the assertion of all our rights, and for this one especially. I understand the anti-slavery societies of this country to be based on two principles. First, the freedom of the blacks in this country, and second, the elevation of them. Let me not be misunderstood. I am not asking for the sympathy at the hands of the abolitionists, sympathy at the hands of any. I think the American people are disposed often to be generous than just. I look over the country at the present time and I see educational societies, sanitary commissions, freemen associations, and they're all the like. And yes, they're all very good. But in regards to the colored people, there is always more is benevolent. I perceive than just manifested towards us. What I ask for, the Negro, is not benevolence, not pity, not sympathy, but simple justice. The American people have always been anxious to know what they shall do with us. General Banks was distressed when solitude as to what he should do with the Negro. Everybody has asked the question, and they learn to ask it early of the abolitionists. What shall we do with the Negro? I have but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. If the apples shall not remain on the tree of their strength, if they are worm-eaten at the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for tying or fastening them on the tree in any way, except by nature's plan. And if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own two legs, let them fall also. All I ask is, give them a chance to stand on their own two legs. Let them alone. Let him alone. If you see him on his way to school, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going to the dinner table at a hotel, let him alone. If you see him going to the ballot box to cast his vote in November, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going into a workshop, just leave him alone. If you see him walking down the street, don't hog-tie him, let him breathe. If you see him driving down the street, leave him alone. Don't kill him. Your interference is doing him a positive injury. General Banks' preparation is of a piece with this attempt to prop up the Negro. Let him fall if he cannot stand alone. If the Negro cannot live by the land of internal justice, so beautifully pictured to you in the illustration used by Mr. Phillips, the fault is not yours. It will be his who made us. Him who made us. And establish that line for his government. Let him live or die by that. If you will only untie his hands and give him a chance, I think he will live. He will work as readily for himself as the white man. A great many delusions have been swept away by this war. One was that the Negro could not work. He has proved his ability to work, and another one was that the Negro would not fight, that he possessed only the most sheepish attributes of humanity. What aspects Lamb or an Uncle Tom, disposed to take off his coat whenever required, fold his hands, and be whipped by anybody who wanted to whip him. But the war has proved that there is a great deal of human nature in the Negro, and he will fight. Mr. Quincy Adams, the president, said in earlier days than this, when there is a reasonable possibility of whipping anybody, it will not be the Negro. It will not be the black man. Thank you. I stole these hands. I stole these feet. I stole this mind of mine. When I spoke of fighting, I spoke of war. Well, I'm talking about April the 1st, 1861, when the Civil War was taking place. General Banks, who commissioned me to travel to Washington, D.C. because I had questions. I had questions towards the President of these United States. And at that time, it was no other than President Abraham Lincoln. Upon my arrival off of that train from Rochester, New York, I was allowed to enter into the White House as the first black man. And going up the stairwell, I recall being called a name. But once I got to the top of the stairwell, in front of that line of other men, white men, preparing to go see the president, I heard the name Frederick Douglass called. And when I walked into the Oval Office, there he was, my first live viewing of President Abraham Lincoln. And as I looked at him, he stood up. And when he stood up, I went up as such, because he was tall, 6'2". Well, myself, I was 6'1". I just didn't anticipate that he would be taller than me. And he invited me to sit. As I sit, we began to engage in conversation. And his words to me was, Mr. Douglass, I heard all about you. And I heard about your abolitionists and what the work that you're doing. I'm proud of you. And I responded by saying, thank you, sir. But, sir, I come to speak with you on 3 matters of the heart. And he said, what is it, Mr. Douglass? I said, first of all, sir, as you know, we are engaged in the Civil War at this time, the Confederates and the South. And what I can't understand, sir, is how we are engaged in this war and you are allowing this war to go on with the fighters, with the men fighting with one hand behind their back. No war is ever won with man standing with one hand behind their back. What do I mean? As he looked at me puzzled. The white man is free to fight in this war. I'm here to discuss with you, sir, the fact that you have black men that are geared and ready to fight alongside the white men that are already there. But there must be a trade-off, sir. If my black men, the black Negro, is to go out and fight, the trade-off is that when he go to fight, after the fight is over, he is allowed to be a free man. Not to come back into slavery, but to be a free man. Well, when I mentioned that, the president looked at me, again, kind of puzzled. But I went on, and I said, on top of that, sir, I've noticed that the black men that are already in the service, fighting, if you will, they are being mistreated. When they are captured, they are killed. When the white soldiers are captured, they might get a penalty. Also, as far as the quarters go, my question is how can the black man be made to sleep outside where the white man is comfortable, the white soldier is comfortable sleeping in his cot inside? How can the white man get more pay than the Negro soldier? How can the white man get comfortable meals, whereas the black man is made to eat the scraps? So I speak to you today, sir, in reference to putting it on an even scale, because we're all fighting the same war. It's the Civil War. And I also come as well, sir, to talk about the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment will free all blacks in this country. And also, not only that, the 14th Amendment, with the ability to vote. So, sir, these are the things that I come to you today and lay out on the table for you, sir. Well, Mr. Lincoln got out of his chair and he went to the window and he looked out, and he paused as he looked out the window. And believe it or not, as he looked out the window, I could see him. I could actually see him looking down the road, maybe 100 years from now, when we as blacks would be free. And he turned around and he said, well, Mr. Douglas, to be honest with you, I don't know. Because if we allow the blacks to be on an even scale with the whites, that might cause even more issues for the country. Sir, if you don't mind, he says, I think we should take this a little slower. Well, his taking it a little slower again would have resulted in blacks still being in slavery for another 100 years. Well, eventually, as I continued to go out, or better yet, as I stood outside of the White House after shaking Mr. Abraham Lincoln's hands, I will be honest, standing outside of the White House, I looked back at the White House with my hands on my hip, and I said to myself, I felt big there, being the first black man to enter into the Oval Office of the White House. But moving on, my two sons, Louis and I got a blank there, sorry about that. But my two sons, Louis and Robert, they served in the military. Yes, my son Louis was a lieutenant and Robert was a captain. And believe it or not, they fought a good fight. And as they were fighting, I was recruiting. I was out speaking all over the land to get black men to come and join in to help fight this fight, to fight the fight of freedom. Because to be honest with you, the Confederates did not want blacks to be free. So we knew we had to make a united front to fight. So the 54th Regiment, with the General Stern, allowing me to do this mission. And not only that, we lost 120,000 soldiers, along with the Captain Shaw. We lost. However, it was the advantage of being able to take part in this war so that we as black men and black women, black baby girls and boys could eventually be free. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, but I will share. During this course, on January the 1st of 1863, while we were all banked together in Rochester, New York, we were awaiting a word. What word were we waiting? Well, that word came on a horseback. And that gentleman jumped off that horse and he unraveled that form and he said to us that on this day, January the 1st, 1863, blacks in this country are forever free, no longer slaves in the United States of America. Well, I have you know that was jubilation. And I'm glad. I am ecstatic that I had the opportunity to have a say in our black men, boys, and girls and women being free. And not only that, I wanted to fight, and I did fight, so that black women in this country will not only be free, but they will have the ability to vote without being hassled. Those were one of the things that I was permanent fighting for, the women's suffrage in this country. So now for everybody who don't know, who am I? I mentioned Frederick Douglass, but let me go back before the Civil War came about. It was February the 14th, 1818, in Eastern Maryland, down by Hillsborough River. I was on a plantation, the Lloyd's Plantation. The Lloyd's Plantation was the richest and biggest plantation in Eastern Maryland. 500 slaves Master Lloyd, he owned. And he also owned my family as well. Speaking of my family, my grandmother, Betty Bailey, who I had a wonderful love for. Would you believe that my grandmother, Betty Bailey, took care of my master's family from tot to adult? And when my grandmother became old and senile, they put her out in the woods. And when she passed, they didn't give her a proper funeral. They dug a hole and just put her carcass in the hole. My mother, Harriet Bailey, would you believe that at times she would walk sometimes 12 to 14 miles in the pit of the dark with no shoes on through the woods to come see me as a little baby? And if she wasn't back on that plantation before dawn, there was a whip waiting on her. Well, being that the word is, because I must be honest with you, see, we as slaves, we had no knowledge of dates of our birth. There was no thing for blacks such as a birth certificate. As a matter of fact, if you was an animal, you had more rights than we did. Can you imagine what we were going through? And my mother, Miss Harriet Bailey, she would come in the pit of the night and she would rock me. And she would call me her little Valentine. That's where I believe personally that February the 14th came into play, 1818. Who was my dad? Who was my father? There's no justification, but there's just hearsay that my father was a white man. They called him Captain Anthony, Aaron Anthony. Well, I'll have you know, because of the fact that I was a fair-skinned kid, people knew that I had a white father. But that did not stop me from the whippings that would come about. Even his daughter, Miss Lucretia did not know that I was her baby brother. But for some reason, she would favor me. I guess maybe it was the genes. I guess we had the same genes, though she didn't know, but something told her within that, be easy on that little black boy. And I have you know that by the time I was 7 years old, I was displaced from the Lloyd's plantation and put on a carriage and sent off to Baltimore. They sent me to Baltimore to live with the Hughes family. Master Hughes and Miss Sophia, and they had a little son by the name of Tommy. And when we arrived at that big white house in Baltimore, Fells Point to be fact, and I'm walking up towards the house and see, unlike you all today, we could not look white folks in their face. So the closer I got as a 7-year-old boy, I put my head down, and when I see their feet, I would step up to their feet, and Miss Sophia, she would put a hand under my chin and have me to lift my chin up with my eyes closed, and she would say, baby, open your eyes. But I wouldn't open my eyes because she wasn't going to whip me for looking her in her face. But she kept tempting me, and I wound up looking her in the face, and I saw those big blue eyes and those big old white teeth and the red cheeks. And Master Huard, he came to me and he said, Frederick, now you're here to take care of little Tommy. That's your job. You take care of my son, little Tommy. And little Tommy is probably about the same age as I am. But the beautiful thing of it is, ladies and gentlemen, Tommy went to school. Tommy came home with books. And I, Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, yes, I would sneak up to his room at any given time. When the family was gone, it was my opportunity to run up that stairwell and get into those books and begin to read. Now, I must let you know, Miss Sophia, she had a little, how can you say, a little thing for me, if you will, because she treated me not as a slave, she treated me as a human being, as her son. And she would have times that she would be sitting on the couch reading, and she would invite me there to sit with her. And we would do ABCs, and we would do reading the Bible and what have you, until that one day when Master Huard walked in and he saw us reading. And he hollered at Miss Sophia, what are you doing? Don't teach those little Negroes how to read. You teach them how to read, and they're going to want to take over. And he stepped before me and he said, Frederick, if I ever catch you reading again, I will tear your hide. And I, with my head down, I said, yes, Master, I'll never read again. I hate reading. Reading is bad, Master. Well, that's what I told Master. I told him, that's what came out of my mouth. I'll never read again. But I have you know, in my mind, he opened up a door. He opened up a door, and that door consists of letters, words, vocabulary. And I was eager to learn. Well, as time went on, maybe about another 6 years, I'm at the age of 16 years old, they send me off to Master Corvée. Now, Master Corvée was a stern master. The first day I was on that plantation, he whipped me. When I walked on that plantation, I walked straight up. 6 months later, I was walking like this because he had beat the hide off of me every day. And I got to the point where I ran away. And I ran away and I ran to a cabin out in the woods. It was a black free man. His name was Mr. Ruffles. Mr. Ruffle invited me in, and he took me out to the woods the next day, and he dug up a rabbit's foot. And he said, Frederick, you take this rabbit foot and you put it in your pocket I guarantee you that mean old master won't touch you again. And I told him, I said, I don't believe in superstition. I'm not taking it. Well, he said, no problem. You go back and get the whipping. I said, nope, you know what? I'm going to take this rabbit foot, and I put it in my pocket. As I trotted on back to the plantation, went to go over the fence, who was coming my way? Yep, Master Corvée. And when he saw me, he said, come, Frederick, come. There was no whip or anything. And he put his arms around me and he said, you know, take the day off. And tomorrow, I need you to go out to the barn and clean the barn up. No problem, sir. Well, that next day, which was Monday, I'm out there cleaning up the barn. And who comes in? It's Master Corvée. What does he have in his hand? He has a whip in his hand. And he whips out and it ties around my ankle and he starts pulling me forward. And I managed to go down and get the rope and I tied it around my wrist and I pulled him towards me. And as I pulled him towards me, we started battling. And we battled for a good hour and a half. And in the midst of it, he shouted out to his Robert. Robert was another slave. And he was screaming, help, help, come get me, help me, get Frederick. Robert came in and he said, Master, I'm not here to help you to whip on Frederick. You do that yourself. He went on about his business. And another slave came, he opened up the door and he just looked and he said to himself, no, I don't want none of that. And there was a young lady, burly young lady. And Master screamed out at her and he knew she was going to come. And I was just praying that she don't come because I know if she would have came, I was done. Well, she looked in and she said, Master, I have nothing to do with that. And she went on about her business. But when it was all said and done, Master stayed down and I got up. Master stayed down, I got up. And Master said, Frederick, you lucky because I started to beat you. And the 6 months that I remained on that plantation, Master never touched me again. But moving on, just for the sake of time, September the 3rd, 1838. And in between that time, I had met a beautiful young lady by the name of Anna. Anna played a very big part because she was a free black woman. She managed to get me a ticket, a free ticket, a sailor suit, and a fake ID. And on that day of September the 3rd, 1838, I boarded a train going to New York. And when I got to New York, I managed to meet another lawyer friend who took me in. And in the discussion, we talked about my last name. And he said, that name of yours, Frederick, we'll have to change it. And we came up with Frederick Johnson, only for a minute. And there was a play, Lady of the Lake. And the name, Douglas, with one S. When he mentioned that name, I said, that's the name I want. So Frederick Douglass with two S. And if you're listening to me, I want you to say, Frederick Douglass. Well, before I know it, he has sent for my wife, Anna. We got married. And we went on up to New Bedford. And when we got to New Bedford, I had the great opportunity to meet a wonderful gentleman who fought for the slaves, the anti-slavery, William Lloyd Garrison. And he asked me to speak, and at this time I was 20 years old, maybe 20, 21 years old. I was frightened to get up and speak in front of all those white people. And I spoke to those white people, and I told them and I shared the story of what a slave, what a black man, what a black woman, how they divide our families, our black children. And when it was all said and done, all the white people that were there, they stood up and gave a standing ovation. And Mr. William Lloyd Garrison took the mic and he asked the question, did we just hear an animal speak? And the crowd roared with no. Did we just hear a simpleton speak? And the crowd roared with no. He said, this is Frederick Douglass. And everybody gave a hand. And next thing I know, Mr. Garrison hired me to go on a 6-month speaking tour throughout the West, throughout the North, telling the story about slavery. Well, as time went on, Anna and I, we started having our little family, and we moved to Rochester, New York. In the midst of living in Rochester, New York, I had the great pleasure of meeting a young man. As a matter of fact, this young man, I invited him to stay at my house for a month. And within the month, I only charged him $3 a week. And my children, they loved him. My wife, she loved him. We had great conversation together. Who is this man I speak of? No other than the great John Brown. But what took us apart is John Brown wanted me to go with him to Harper's Ferry to destroy all the white slave owners. I knew that I could not go. And the last thing I remember John Brown telling me, he said, whether we live or die, this mission must be done. And we hugged each other, and he went about his way. And next thing I know, John Brown and his men had been hung in Harper's Ferry. And William Lloyd Garrison, Mr. Garrison came to the house and he burst in and he said, Frederick, you must leave. Well, I took his advice and I did leave. I left after I wrote my first book, The Narrative and Life of Frederick Douglass. And he said, you told on all of your masters, Frederick. You must leave. And I did leave. I boarded a ship to Canada. And I went over to New England. And when I got to New England, 2 of my good friends, they came to me. Miss Candy Staten, primary her. She came to me and she said, Frederick, we sent $750 to your master, Hugh Ard, and we paid for your freedom. I was at a social. I had a little drink of tea in my hand. And I looked at her and I said, oh, you did? And she replied, she said, yes, Frederick, you are free. And Frederick, what we would like for you to do is bring your family over and you can live among us. We have a house that we can set you up in. All that sounds fantastic, but I knew my mission had to be taken on. So I told them, thank you very much, but I must go back to the States. I must go back to America, and I must go back and stand tall for my brothers and sisters that are still there. And that's what I did. And when I came back to America in 1847, I stepped on this soil a free man. Well, my house got bombed on 1st Street in Rochester, New York. And not only that, my baby girl, Anna, she died from a disease, an incurable disease. And to move forth, my 2 oldest children, Rosetta and, yes, Frederick, gave a hand in the newspaper that I began, the North Star, the Frederick Douglass Weekly. Well, Mr. Garrison and I, who were great friends, we began to see 2 separate visions in reference to the Constitution. He saw where the U.S. Constitution was for slavery. I saw it as against slavery. And that's where we both went our separate ways. And moving on from there, Anna and I, after in 1852, I gave a speech. My 4th of July speech. This holiday is yours, not mine. You can celebrate. We must mourn. And as I begin to wrap up, I am thankful that I had the opportunity, going back to the Civil War, I am thankful that I had the opportunity to have a say. And we as black men in this country, to bear arms and to fight for our freedom. Though we lost many, but it will always be noted that if it wasn't for us black men and the black women who were allowed to enter into the premises of the war, we would not have won, because they were fighting this war with one hand behind their back. I will forever be loyal to my great friend, President Abraham Lincoln, for the doors that he opened, not only for us as black people, but him as being a great friend of mine. And with that, I must state this last statement. I was born on February the 14th, 1818. And as I came back in from my last presentation at the Washington Convention Center in Washington, D.C., being helped by no other than Susan B. Anthony, I got out of my carriage and I went to my home in Anacostia, Maryland. And on my way up the stairwell on February the 20th, 1895, at the age of 77, on my way up the stairwell, I wound up having a stroke. And from there, I was demised. And in my death, I have you know, I wound up being the first black man to lay in state at the Washington Capitol building. So if you ever get a chance, please, I know you have computers nowadays, go online and check me out, Frederick Douglass. And if you have a chance to travel to Washington, D.C., please go to my home in Anacostia. With that, I say thank you and agitate, agitate, agitate. Thank you.